All right. Let me say again, this class is about leadership. And one of the first questions that we want to ask as we go into this material is why? Why should we study about leadership? And the first answer is because of the need for spiritual leaders. Now, guys, it doesn't take long to look around in our world that there are all kinds of leaders that exist. One of your assignments specifically involves that. Corporate leaders. You're going to talk about different religious leaders, educational leaders, political leaders. The list goes on and on. And you're going to find that as you do that assignment, there are some of those leaders who are going to have some great similarities. But the one thing that stands out about why this class is so important is because we need spiritual leaders, godly men and women who are fulfilling the roles that God has given in His Word for their lives, that will help them be those who are taking the church in the future where it needs to be and that God designed it to be. And so we need to study leadership because of the need for spiritual leaders. The second reason why we need to study leadership is because of the breakdown of the home. Again, this class is not designed for the purpose of providing a number of different statistics, but obviously it doesn't take long to realize that, especially in our country, in this culture, that there's a great breakdown in the home. When you have many, many children that are being raised by single parents, mothers or fathers, then obviously we can see the challenge to the way that God designed the home from the very beginning. And when you look in Scripture, you're going to find that not only in Genesis chapter 2, where it talks about the idea of Adam and Eve coming together and being one flesh, but when you carry the idea that we studied in Deuteronomy chapter 6 about the Shema and the responsibility of parents to keep the significance of who God is before their children and to provide them that spiritual training, it's very significant. And when the home breaks down, it creates all kinds of issues. When we look at Ephesians chapter 6, the responsibility of the father, it's a responsibility of leadership. Train up your children in the instruction and discipline of the Lord. Well, obviously, when the home breaks down, God's plan cannot work. We need to study this subject because of the breakdown that exists in the home. I found it interesting in talking about in a number of different settings overseas in third world countries about the issue of having an orphan's home and some of the different homes that exist. And they don't exist because children have no parents. They exist because parents can't take care of their children. Yesterday I was listening to our son-in-law, Chuck Rancher, give a presentation about the work in India that he's been over there twice to teach in the school. And they take him out to a place where they have Skinner's Garden Orphanage. And it's a home for widows and orphans. And as he explained, the home there doesn't exist because children don't have parents. They have parents. But those parents can't take care of those children. And so the home that exists there, the orphanage, exists for the purpose of providing for them. Well, guys, that's a breakdown. When parents are not in a position to be able to take care of their children where they abandon them to someone else to raise them, then we've got problems in leadership. And that's why we need to study this subject. A third reason why we need to study this subject is because the future of the church depends upon it. The future of the church depends on it. Now, I don't know about your experience as far as within the church, congregations where you have worked or attended or been involved with. But my experience, as limited as it has been, emphasizes the fact that we're in trouble in the church worldwide when it comes to leadership. Now, to give you a scenario of what I'm talking about, and a lot of my experience, especially in the last 3.5 years, has been working with congregations overseas. I can count on less than one hand the number of congregations I'm familiar with in 15 different countries that I have been involved in working. Less than one hand the number of congregations that have elders and deacons. It doesn't exist. Very, very rarely do you find congregations overseas in other countries that have leaders. But the sad part is that's what's happening in our country. What 50 years ago was built upon and established with leaders who served as elders and deacons, we're beginning to see vanish. Why? Why does this kind of problem exist when it comes to the church today? In the United States of America, where we have so many congregations around this country, and yet so few really have strong leadership. In fact, to quote from the Old Testament, like people like priests, well, oftentimes that's what's happening in churches, like people like preacher. And whatever the direction the preacher's going, that's the direction the people go. And that may not necessarily be the right direction. That's why God designed the church to have men who served as elders. They were shepherds. They were involved in overseeing the work of the church. And they are to make sure that sound doctrine is being preached. But as you and I both know, that's not always the case. And the other issue that we're finding is that there are many congregations that in their aspect of who they have as elders, as far as biblical knowledge, they don't know it. They don't know the book. They don't know how to defend the book. And they're easily swayed far too often to go in the direction of someone who is a smooth talker.
The problem is that the elders that are appointed don't have the knowledge to.
Oftentimes, I'm not saying all of them. Now, obviously, that's not the case in every congregation, but there are certainly places to where elders are serving and they're not equipped biblically with the knowledge of God's Word and the ability to defend it against false teachers. And so as a result, we've seen many congregations drift off into using instrumental music, involving women in leadership positions within the church, and as well changing the way in which many areas are done in regards to evangelism and who is and who isn't a Christian. And so we need, the future of the church depends upon it. The church in the present depends upon it. But certainly the church in the future depends upon leadership. And so that's one of the reasons why we're studying this particular subject. A fourth reason why we're studying this is because of the eternal condition of the lost. The eternal condition of the lost. Even though there are obviously some who teach in our world that death is not final, that there are ways around changing the eternal destination, that's not true. I've been asked over the years about judgment. Are we judged when we die at that moment, or do we go to a place and we wait for a final judgment? And you're going to find so much material and doing research on those two possibilities that it'll make you crazy. And even in doing your own research, it's kind of interesting biblically to find some passages that seem to indicate that we wait for a final judgment day. And then there are other passages that seem to indicate that we are judged immediately when we die. Well, my response is this. Whichever way, death seals our destiny. There is no changing the outcome once we depart from this life. And when you think about eternity, there is no changing it. There is no coming out of, after 1,000,000 years of suffering, the torment of hell, that then you get to enjoy the pleasures of heaven. And if we could ever really wrap our minds around the eternal condition of the lost, and then begin to think about the magnitude of the people in this world, 7 billion people. And you guys who have heard me make my presentation for the extension schools, you know the statistics that I've presented about the idea of what the U.S. Census Bureau and the World Census Bureau tells us. I mean, when you consider that every second that clicks off the clock, 1.8 people die. And when you put that in perspective of just the time it takes to watch the evening news, 30 minutes, that 3,420 people will stand before God while you're enjoying supper or watching the evening news or whatever it is. When you put that in perspective, and that most, if not all of those people are not prepared to stand before God, that's why we need to study leadership. Someone has to lead them to Christ. You do remember from the book of Acts, right? Chapter 8, the Ethiopian eunuch. Philip asks him, do you understand what you read? He said, how can I unless someone teach me, guide me, lead me? So the idea is that we need leaders. And the reason we study this subject is because of that eternal condition of the lost. Another reason. I'm sorry?
Reminds me of Lazarus and the rich man.
Yes.
Father
Yes.
Abraham, can you just give me a few drops? And he said, sorry.
There's a gulf between us. That's exactly right. Great analogy in the story that Jesus teaches there about the rich man and Lazarus.
I think we say a lot, oh, we have the good news, good news. I think it's the greatest news ever.
Yes.
But we're not being proclaimers. Otherwise, the church pews would be filled. You know, we would be having 2 services, 3 services.
Hold that thought. When we study
Sharing
homiletics,
faith.
we're going to get involved in that a lot more. But you're exactly right.
Somebody shared with me, because I was praying, looking for, and she shared with me, and that's why I'm here today.
Very good.
All it took is she sharing her faith.
And that's what it's going to take for us too. And see, I think the aspect of leadership is helping prepare others to do that very thing. Helping others know how to share their faith. That's a part of what leadership involves. We'll talk more about that. Then, the desire of people to follow. It's interesting to me that in thinking about this particular statement, that 2 to 3%, only 2 to 3% of people see themselves as a leader. 2 to 3% see themselves as a leader. Most folks see themselves as being a follower, and they desire to follow. They want someone who will lead them, who will teach them. But the sad part is there are too many out there who are leading in the wrong direction, and there are too many who know the truth who are not willing to help others have something and someone they can follow and point them to the right one. Dale?
Are you saying spiritual leader or just a leader in general?
This whole class is about spiritual leadership.
No, I mean, when you're saying that
Only 2 or 3%.
Oh,
Is
yes.
in
Yes.
the church, or you're talking
In the church.
in the church?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I
Yeah,
was thinking-
within the church, 2 to 3% see themselves as leaders. And really, why wouldn't they? I mean, think about the average congregation. How many out of a congregation of 250 people are going to serve as an elder or a deacon or a preacher? And generally speaking, the mindset is those are the leaders. And so it's pretty limited. Go ahead.
But that doesn't slow down I believe that God instills in us our unique personalities.
Mhm.
So how do you deal with the 25% of people that have the type A dominant personality?
But see, from a spiritual perspective, they don't see themselves as leaders. They would see themselves maybe as a leader in the corporate world
Okay.
or in some other aspect, but not spiritually speaking.
So the numbers would reflect differently when we're talking about
Oh, yes.
worldly. They would,
Oh, yes.
So much more would say, yeah, we're a leader.
Yes.
Spiritually speaking.
Absolutely.
But
I
Bob,
still think the majority are going to tell you that they're not leaders as far as, but the
Not
numbers
as
are not going to
drastic
be.
as 2 to 3. Maybe
That's right.
20 or 25.
Not as drastic as 2 to 3%.
Well, the Bible spells out very clearly what the requirements are for eldership and
Uh-huh.
deacons and stuff. It doesn't defeat the purpose. If they're not yet qualified, they can be elders in training. They're not qualified. Why put an elder in? Just like you said, they don't know really a whole total grasp of God's word, and they're elders, that defeats the purpose. It's like the blind leading the blind, just like Mark gave me the wrong syllabus. Sorry, Mark.
It's been recorded for all of history.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mark, what's his name, Mark Anthony?
Yeah, the one and only.
But guys, let me explain it this way. There are individual gifts that everybody brings to the table in the church. And they all reflect some aspect of leadership. Now, not everybody's going to be an elder. Not everybody's going to be a classroom teacher. Not everybody's going to be a deacon. Not everybody's going to be a preacher. But we all are leaders. And the fact is, we've got to help congregations learn that everyone contributes to leading others to Christ. And the problem is there are too many who just want to sit on the pew, and they don't see themselves as being able to do anything great. And because this 2 to 3% are the only ones who see themselves as fulfilling a role that would be classified as a leader, then what's happening is we find congregations becoming stagnant in their growth because the members in the pew are not influencing others around them, leading them to Christ. And so as a result, if the preacher's not doing it, if the elders aren't doing it, if the deacons aren't doing it, then it's not getting done. We've developed a mindset in the church in the 21st century, and I don't know how far back it goes that we've developed this, but what's happened is we've developed a mindset that the pulpit is where evangelism takes place. That we need to invite people to come to the worship service so that our preacher can teach them and convert them. And so that's our mindset. So that relieves us of the responsibility of trying to lead someone personally to Christ. We'll try to invite them to come to the worship service and then allow the preacher to try to set up a Bible study with them or allow the preacher to teach them from the pulpit. And we've got to change that. Somehow we've got to help members of the congregation realize this is a responsibility that we all have. Now, we may not all do the same thing, but we're all leading to the same place. And it takes everybody contributing to make that happen. And we've got to understand the way that Paul described the church as a body. When you look at Romans chapter 12, verses 4 and following, and you look at 1 Corinthians chapter 12, now while we're not talking miraculous gifts, but the text does teach us that there are gifts that we have as individuals within the congregation. And it says, let each exercise them accordingly. Well, if the body is going to function, and if it's going to grow the way that God designed it, it's going to take every individual member fulfilling their role. And that's really what Ephesians 4, verse 16 is all about. To the building up of the body of itself in love. And that's going to take everybody doing that. Yes, sir.
Sometimes we overlook the word desire for the qualifications. A lot of people may qualify, but one of the stipulations is they have to have that desire, and we overlook that word.
We overlook it, and the sad part is many who are qualified use it as an excuse.
Yeah.
Well, I just don't want to be an elder. Okay? Why are we not doing things differently in the church to help prepare men to have that aspiration in their life? To have that desire to lead in the church, to shepherd God's people. Why are we not doing things in the church to prepare men to do that in the future? We see the value and the need for preacher training schools, and guys, I agree 100%. We need schools to train men to go out and preach and teach. I don't have any problems with that, but what are we doing to prepare men for the future to serve as shepherds in the church? You talk about why we need a class on leadership and why leadership needs to be taught in every congregation in the country and in the world. It's because we need leaders.
That's okay.
Bob,
Go ahead, I got a couple others.
our Lord, the Great Commission, our Lord, He didn't have preaching schools and stuff. He just fasted overnight, selected 12 disciples.
But he
We
did
did-
spend 3.5 years grooming
Yeah,
them.
he groomed every person.
Yeah.
Do we have a mentorship program where, brother, I'm going to take you under my
Well,
wing. I have vision for your
if you'll
life.
hold tight with me, we're going to cover a great section in mentoring in this class. Because it is vital.
I didn't think I was cut out for being a preacher. I thought, hey, God gave me education. That's my credentials,
Yeah.
experience. I thought that's where I'll go and start a school.
I look forward to seeing your timeline.
But, I didn't see and it took convincing me,
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
I didn't believe in that I was there. And
You're
I think
right.
it takes people having vision for certain people.
And really, when you start putting together the timeline that we'll talk about later in the quarter, it'll be interesting to see, because when you look back on your life and you see different areas where God was working in your life and you didn't even know it, preparing you for something that you would do now. I mean, your master's degree in education or in teaching, who would have thought that preparation and training is going to help you in teaching others about the most important thing? And it's not social studies, but rather it's about the Lord. So, and everybody's going to come to the table with the same kind of experiences. So,
I wasn't going to, but
go ahead. That's what this class is about.
well, it's like we talked about men who are qualified in every way except for they're lacking in the desire. And I've seen that where we were at, and a man who's qualified, and we were about to have no eldership. And he said, well, if I have to. And there has to be, beyond, okay, you're going to go into it, and there are going to be headaches and problems, but you have to desire it, not because I want to be the leader and the boss. I have to desire it because this is what is the good for the church. This is what is the good for the people who are attending here. And that was just something that was very bothersome to me, because I didn't want to, because I don't want to have the headaches.
Sure.
But there has to be a desire that goes beyond, it's not going to be cupcakes and a party every.
Yeah.
There's a desire because there is a need, and God has called you to fulfill that need. And I desire to fulfill God's will for me.
Very good. And that's exactly right. And I think sometimes what's happened, and I'm going to make a lot of general statements over the quarter, and I'll just say to preface now that I realize that this is not characteristic of every congregation and every eldership. Let me just say that up front, so that when I make some of these statements in general, you may know congregations that are not like this, and that's okay. But in general, what's happened is we've turned an eldership into a board of directors. And they don't want to deal with the problems that board of directors has to deal with. They don't understand the concept of shepherding the way that God designed it. And because that's the case, too often, then guys don't want it. They don't want to get involved in that. It's like, I don't want to spend my evenings every week on every Thursday night or every Sunday night dealing with that kind of stuff. And so I can see quickly why they would say, I just don't have the desire. Because I wouldn't have the desire to do that. But when we really learn about shepherding and leading in that regards, and just as you said, as God has called them to do, prepare their life in all of these qualifications, and then to say, well, I just don't want to.
If you're a Christian man, that should be the goal of every Christian man, to be an elder. That's how we should raise our children. Real men are raiders, but even more real men are elders.
Oh my goodness. Okay, Jake, let's move over here, Chris.
It was so good up to that point.
I thought that was a great point.
Go ahead.
Over campaign week, we were studying with a woman at the church building, and over the course of studying, we had gotten to eldership and leadership in the church, going through the establishment and all that stuff. And she had questions about, so does every congregation have these elders? And before I could answer, because the preacher's wife was right there too, she made the excellent comment where either we have them or we're actively working to get them.
Right.
And that is the way we should be, is if we don't have them, even if we have them, they're not actively doing what they should be, we should be actively working to get elders that are going to better the congregation.
Absolutely. And if nothing else, for the future.
Yeah.
Preparing those who are coming up for the future. But, yeah, you're exactly right. That's a great way to answer that. Very good. Did anybody else have their hand up? Yes, Dave.
Just a thought with regards to something that Nathan said about children. And I think it's important that we start with people when they're young and instill in them this desire to want to be leaders and to want to be elders and to want to have a desire for that office and to be able to be qualified. Because if we wait until somebody's married and they've got a couple kids and they're involved in, Sally's got soccer and Billy's got baseball and I really don't have time, you're going to have a much harder time instilling that desire and getting them to be qualified at that point.
Yes.
Rather than trying to train them up when maybe they're teens, and having that look as something that they maybe want to attain for the future for themselves.
Well, and I'm going to say this, and I understand, and we need more sound men preaching the gospel. I don't second guess that at all. But think about it. We have future preachers training camps. We have preacher training schools. We have degrees in Bible. But how many of you have ever heard of a future elders camp? Elder training school. And I'm not saying that we should have those, but at the same time, what are we doing to prepare those who would shepherd God's people for the future? What kind of classes in leadership? If we know that people desire to follow someone, they need a shepherd, then how are we working to prepare congregations for the future in regards to that? And I think because nothing was put in place over the last 50 years, we're seeing the repercussions and the consequences of providing that training in the past. So now we're living out the consequences in the church today of that lack of preparation. And we have got to start somewhere to turn that around. And I think it starts right here, which is why we study this subject.
Going back to what Chip said, and we focus on the men, but honestly, we need to be training our daughters to be wives of elders as well.
Absolutely.
Because they have qualifications as well. And I've seen men who I thought were qualified in every avenue except for their wife. And
I've seen some wives, if they were men, would have made great elders.
I've seen that.
But anyway, we know that doesn't work either. So, Elder?
I'm fairly new at this, but there's something that I've noticed in the short 4 years that I've been attending congregations. The elders that are in charge and make a decision, we're finding that a lot of the congregation just goes against it. They don't want to listen to what the elders are teaching. So the ones that are qualified, I don't want that job because no one's going to back me up.
Yeah.
So there's got to be a point, too, that as preachers, as leaders, as people that are going to be out there, we need to emphasize in our preaching also how important it is that the congregation backs up our elders.
Well, and I certainly don't know the reason behind every situation like that. But I do know that in part, I think the problem is our lack of understanding the role. Not only as a congregation, but as well those who are serving in position of a shepherd or an elder. And because we don't understand what that really involves and means from a biblical standpoint, that's why we're seeing problems like that. If congregations view their elders as a board of directors, why wouldn't they go against it? They didn't agree with the decision. I mean, we voted them in, just like we have a democracy in this country, and so we voted them in, and we can vote them out. That's our mindset. And in some ways, I think that's the reason why a democratic society has hurt the church. Because our mindset is we have rights, and we can vote them in, and we can vote them out. If we don't like you, if you're not politicking for us and going to get what we want, we're going to get rid of you. See, we just don't have the concept in the church today the way that we need to of what a shepherd is and how highly that is to be attained in the church, and that we as sheep should esteem them greatly. You see, we mention that in passing from the pulpit, but we don't really communicate that concept in every aspect of what the church is. And we've got to fix that. I mean, it's something we've got to fix.
So that's what I was getting at. As we're up there in the pulpit, or as we're giving classes on Sunday morning, I think there should be a slight bit more of how the church functions.
And I agree. I mean, it's going to have to come from the pulpit, and it's going to have to come in our classes. But I'm of the conviction that it's going to have to come more and more one-on-one. We're just going to have to show by our lives and what we're teaching people one-on-one. When we start hearing someone who speaks against the elders, right then is when we've got to be able to address that.
Amen.
And we've got to help change that mindset one at a time by our actions and our one-on-one conversations with people for the future.
To piggyback off of that, too, I think that with regard to eldership, people are kind of see it as a rank in the church, and I feel like part of the problem is that they think that they're training people to be elders by making them deacons, and that now since they're deacon, they're working with the eldership, they're learning all they need to learn or whatever, and so that might make people that set goals, I guess, in order to do that. That would be their first step, I think, or at least that's how they would see it.
EIT, elder in training.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's true. I mean, if you haven't served as a deacon, then how can you serve as an elder? I mean, this is kind of the training ground.
Right.
But, and I'm not saying that deacons can't eventually serve, but there are different qualifications, and they don't always do that, so.
I've also seen them say, well, we're going to appoint him as an elder because he's not quite qualified, but if we appoint him, then he will start doing those things that he should be doing. And so I've seen them appoint elders or deacons who aren't already doing the work of an elder or deacon. And to me, you appoint someone, a deacon, who's already doing the works of a deacon.
Proves himself.
Yeah.
That's what Scripture teaches.
Yeah, and a lot of times we do it the other way around. Let's put him in there so that he can start doing these things. It's just
Very
a
good.
wrong approach to it.
Wes?
I'm going back to the children, raising up the children. One thing that I believe that we're guilty of, just like the world is that we think of our children as our children, just like when we do with our worldly possessions. They're a gift from God. They're God's children, and it's our responsibility to raise them up as God has given us that gift, to raise them up that they are His children. I look in 1 Samuel, and I see how Hannah dedicated her son to God. There was a time years ago where I heard of someone who had just had a baby, and I saw how she publicly said, or the parents publicly said, we want to dedicate our son to the Lord starting today. Well, I don't know what all they meant by that, but I can tell you it had an impact on me thinking, have I dedicated my children to the Lord? Have I done my responsibility to raise them up? Because they are God's children. They're not really my children.
Amen.
Great thought. Great thought. And as leaders, if we can hold that and teach that to families, we'll change the future. We will change
I
the
think of, my thinking is, it's a theocracy, it's not democracy in
Yes.
God's kingdom.
And
God's
that's
word
exactly right.
says, the people who are not following the leaders, they're going directly against God. It's not leaders. But then also, on the other hand, leadership is earned. Salvation is a free gift, but leadership has to be earned. And it's not just a role, a title, it's, serving.
Yep. Great thoughts, guys. This is going to be a good class. We're going to have some great discussion. All right. What is a leader? What is a leader? Here's what I want you to do. In the time that we have remaining in class, I want you to take just a second. I'm just going to start over here with Nathan. We're going to go around the room, but I'm going to give you a second to do this. But I want you to write down one word that in your mind would be descriptive of a leader. I don't want a sentence. All I want is you to find and think about one word that you would use. If someone said, well, what is a leader? How would you define a leader? What one word would you use that would affiliate that? And then after you give that word, and again, I'm going to start over here with Nathan, and we'll come around the room. I want you to explain how you would associate that with a leader. Everybody with me? So be thinking about what word, and I know that what's going to happen is Nathan's going to give one, and somebody's going to go, oh, that was my word. So be thinking about if someone uses your word, what would you follow it up with? I found it interesting. I did this exercise while I was in Kenya, and I asked the guys to think of a word, and then they were going to explain how they associated that word with being a leader or what a leader does. And it was so interesting that I just took volunteers. I said, okay, let's start over here. And then a guy raised his hand, went around the room, never got the same word twice. And there were 20 of them. And so there are just 17 of you. So you
They only
guys
have a few words over there.
give some
That
thought.
would be funny.
Give some thought to it. Are you ready? All right. Tell us what it is, Nathan.
Love.
All right. Explain the connection between love and leadership.
Well, going back to the Pentateuch, Moses was a good leader because he loved his grumbling, complaining people. And I think above all, a leader has to love the people unconditionally because he needs to care about their soul. That needs to be his greatest priority. So to me, love is a characteristic that every leader spiritually should have.
Very good. I like that. It's interesting. I heard the story one time of a situation where there was an elder that was talking to the preacher, and the elder said to this guy, I wished I did my job as good as you did yours. And basically, the preacher's response was, I just love the people. And I couldn't help but think, here's a shepherd who didn't make that connection. So I think that's a great word to describe the idea of a leader. He's got to love he's got to love the people. If you don't love the people who are following you or that you're leading, you probably will not have a very long stint as a leader, at least not of that group. But love's a great word. Wes?
Passionate.
Passionate. Explain.
Passionate encumbers so many different things to make it passionate. When you look at Bible examples of Paul, you see his passion before he was converted over to the Lord, and you see his passion about everything that he did. He was a leader before Christ spoke to him. He was a leader all the way through because he was passionate. You look at Peter and the mistakes he made, but he was a leader because he was passionate, not because of the mistakes he made and necessarily the experiences they had, but because of the passion that they had for their devotion in towards what the goal was.
Okay. How would you define passion?
How would I define passion? The opposite of apathy.
Opposite of apathy, is that what you said? Okay. And I agree. I think that's very much connected. It's interesting, we have a specific section that we're going to talk about. When we get towards the end of the quarter, I deal with 4 essentials to life and leadership. And one of them is going to deal with passion. A leader has to have passion because it's the fuel for his leadership. But what I've learned in the last couple of years is where that word comes from is from a Latin word that means to suffer. And I agree with you. I think passion is vital to leadership, including what you said, plus the idea that, and I think we see this on the part of Paul and Peter. I think those are two great examples. They were willing to suffer, whatever it took to lead people to Jesus. I mean, we see that especially in Paul's writings, but great word, great thought for leaders. I like that. Christopher?
Unbiased.
Unbiased. Ooh, okay. Explain.
Through all the things that a leader does, sometimes he's going to be counseling. An elder counsels and helps others. A preacher and evangelist does the same thing. You can't go into it already having an idea of what's right and wrong. You have to listen to both sides in an unbiased manner. We have to look at God's Word in an unbiased manner, not with our own agendas, so that we can better lead others to Him, and not according to our agendas, but according to God's agenda.
Very good. Can you think of a situation where that is going to be challenging?
When we are learning about something that we've grown our whole life up, learning the opposite of it, and it's kind of hard to be unbiased in that manner.
I was thinking in terms of counseling someone.
In counseling,
Your family?
sometimes when somebody comes up to you by themselves saying, this happened, such and such happened, so that's the only thing you've heard. And so you instantly start forming ideas based on that before you get them both sat down and figure it all out.
Very good. Always remember, there are 2 sides to every story. And that's the challenge. Because what happens, it may even be a friend. Friend's going to come up to you and he's going to say, this is what's happening. This is what I've heard. This is what I saw. This is what's taking place in my life. Blah, 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 blah. They're going to tell you all that stuff. And you're just exactly right what you're saying. You're going to start formulating in your mind already how that needs to be addressed. And you haven't heard the other side. Always remember there are 2 sides to every story. And that other side can make a difference. Being unbiased. And the closer the relationship, the more challenging it is, without a doubt. So, good thoughts. Leaders need to be unbiased. Brad Joy.
Ownership.
Ownership. Explain.
Whether it's a process or a team or a congregation or a class, you own it. And you need to realize that's mine. I need to take care of it. I need to nourish it so it will flourish. I need to leave it better in the end than when it was first given to me. Ownership. It's mine. I need to take care of it. Make sure it works properly and all the things associated with ownership.
Very good. And it does, doesn't it? Changes the perspective of how we approach things when we think of it as ownership. If that's mine, well, would I do it differently if it was mine? If it's not mine, see, it's kind of like if people rent. Have you ever noticed that renters do not take care of property the way that they do if they're owners of the property? I don't know why it is, but that's the way it works. I mean, renters are going to destroy things, and if you make them mad, they'd even destroy more. But ownership. And really, as leaders, there's a great thought behind that idea of it's ours, and we're going to give an account for it. And, of course, the writer of the book of Hebrews even emphasizes that when it comes to elders. They give an account for your soul. Well, be not many of you teachers, James 3, verse 1, knowing that you shall incur a stricter judgment. There's ownership involved in that. And I'm convinced that when it comes to working in third world countries around the world where we're training men to preach the gospel, until congregations really see the need for that ownership, they're not going to work to develop leaders the way they need to. There's a lot to that. It's great word, great thoughts. Brett, or Dale?
Committed.
Committed. Okay, go ahead.
If you're going to be a leader, you need to be committed to it, because people are going to dig in their heels and they're going to resist. And if you're not committed to it, it's going to be very easy for you to turn away or turn aside and not continue to lead. I saw a saying that said, good leaders take you where you want to go. Great leaders take you where you need to be. And so in order to be a great leader, you need to be committed to take people where they need to be, even sometimes when they don't want to go there. And if I could be permitted another little story, if you had
You're permitted.
If you had bacon and eggs, the chicken was involved, but the pig was committed. There are times when you're a leader where you're going to need to be selfless, and you're going to need to maybe sacrifice something of yourself in order to be able to lead the people that you're leading.
That's great thoughts. Yeah, I heard that story about the pig and the chicken. That's pretty funny. The other thing that you made the statement about concerning the difference between a good leader and a great leader, I would even add to that, I don't know if there's another level beyond great leader, but I think included in that aspect of being a great leader is that once they have achieved it, the people look back and say, look what we have done, and not look what he has done. You see, and that's a great aspect of leadership that I think ties into that commitment, that what we're committed to and what we're selfless about and that we're willing to do is to lead people so that in the end they look back and they say, look what we have done. So that's great thoughts. Great word for leadership. All right, Reginald.
Unselfish.
All right.
A leader needs to have the mindset of it's not about me, but it's about everybody else. And you're going to have to deny yourself and make sacrifices.
Isn't that so true? Scripture emphasizes that, and certainly the example we see in Jesus is that idea of being unselfish. I have said, and you'll probably hear me say it before the quarter's over because I'm suffering jet lag and I can't remember what day to day right now what I'm saying. But one of the things that I believe that is the greatest false god of our day is self. We are so about me and about I and the whole concept of what's in it for me, what am I going to benefit from it, and we don't have that concept. And really when you think about corporate leaders and political leaders and really leaders in a lot of other situations, their whole purpose in leading is because of what they're going to benefit from it. I mean, this is going to be a step in the ladder for them. And this concept of being a servant that Rajiv talked about, and the idea of being selfless or unselfish, putting others, it's about them, it's not about me. That's the making of a great leader. And so we're going to talk a lot more about that. Great word for leadership. Jacob. Perspective. Oh, I'm looking forward to this one. Lay it on me, brother.
I would say perspective in the way that a good leader can step back and look at the situation as a whole and see the things that are capable, as well as the things that the whole can do together. And then after that, being able to go in and take care of those things that they can attain those goals and get the work done.
Love it. I love it. The reason I was waiting to hear what you had to say is because the class that I'm taking this quarter at Fuller is Lifelong Leadership and Development. And the thing they have emphasized from the start is perspective. And what is our perspective? When you think about the events that happen in our life, what is our perspective? Do we see them as God allowing those events to take place in our life to help us become who He wants us to be? Or do we see them as a hindrance in being what we want to be? It's all about perspective. And I tell you, it's just an awesome word to think about. I don't recommend movies, and I'm not recommending this one. I saw it, and if you've seen it, great. And if you haven't, you want to, that's on you. I would recommend only watching it with Clear Play, and if you don't know what Clear Play is, you can ask me later. but the movie The Avengers, interesting movie. In the very start of the movie, you've got this situation unfolding, and the Hawk is nowhere to be found. It's because he's up on some ridge way over here, overlooking everything that's taking place. And when he was questioned about it, he said, I get a better view from up here. And that's the way leaders are. They're able to step back, just what you're talking about, Jacob, and look at the whole picture and to have the right kind of perspective as to what they need to do to drive this thing or to lead this thing in the direction it should go. Great work. I really like perspective. Good stuff. Dale Kastner. Influence. I was really hoping that nobody would use that one until the end. But
I'll use
anyway,
it again.
go ahead. Influence.
To me, it describes how others react to your leadership. In other words, just because I'm wearing the tie that says I'm a leader doesn't mean I'm a leader. Going back to what Jacob just said about perspective, a genuine leader will be able to step back and measure his influence on the others. You know, you were mentioning just we need to look at where we have guided them and they've owned it. They have grown, not so much I'm the elder of the church, this is where we need to go, this is where we're at now, and you look back and all of a sudden you're by yourself. You have to measure your influence on those you take care of.
Great stuff. Great thoughts. I'm smiling because of two things. Number one, if you guys have read John Maxwell at all, you'll know that his statement is leadership is influence. I mean, he just narrows it down to that. Leadership is influence. And what's interesting is you're going to influence someone, good or bad, you're going to have influence. And he even points out that you are going to influence a minimum of 4 people every day. That fact alone should cause you to want to study leadership. If I'm going to have influence, doesn't it make sense that I should learn how to do, as what Dale's talking about, measure that influence? The second reason I was smiling is because that last, or close there at the end where you're talking about, you turn around, you see nobody's following you. And Maxwell says the same thing about if you're out here and you're leading and no one's following you, you're just taking a walk. And so I always thought that was pretty cute. There's a difference when it comes to leaders. Leaders influence, they know how to influence, and that is just powerful, powerful thought. Great stuff. Lynn Williams.
We'll use really good words.
How many of you scratched out, Lynn?
Quite a few. Humble. I think, you look at Moses, you look at Paul, but most importantly, you look at Jesus, and our words are meaningless if we come across arrogant or non-loving or if we're humble. You want to listen to someone who's humble, and it's something that we should all strive for, because if we're not, people will not listen to what we say. So.
Excellent thoughts. That's very true. And only thing I want to add to that is really how we understand humility.
Yeah, it doesn't mean we're pushed over or anything.
Yeah, I think sometimes we have this mindset that being humble is about walking around like this. And exactly. I'm just woe is me. Things wrong, such a worm as I. Guys, we are not worthless. Amen. Now, we are unworthy. And there's a difference in those two ideas. We're unworthy for what God has done for us and given to us, but we're not worthless. We're made, as we studied last quarter in OT1, we're made in the image of God. There's no way we can be worthless. But we are unworthy. We do not deserve. And I think if we can have the right perspective on those, then it really changes our understanding of humility and how we exercise that humility in our leadership. And I think it's a foundation to being a great leader. Very, very good. Daniel Maker.
I was going to say careful.
Careful, okay. Lay it on me.
Well, if you think back to Old Testament times when there actually were shepherds that their job was to look over the sheep, they were going to be sure to keep those sheep in whatever was the safest area. They weren't going to lead them to the edge of a cliff and then, direct them that way. And the church that I just came from in Oklahoma, the North MacArthur Church, the elders sometimes, it seems like the decisions that they make takes forever.
I know.
And, I had to go through all these, just coming to the rally and all these different meetings I had with them and everything. It kind of got frustrating, and I even found myself just thinking, okay, this is kind of ridiculous, how much. But, the idea that I saw in all of it was that these elders really, really care about every decision that they make, and make sure that everything that they do is going to be for the betterment of the congregation. They don't make careless decisions. Everything that they do is very carefully put together. So
very good thoughts. I'm smiling because you used the illustration that I was thinking of. When you used that word, I was thinking, man, sometimes elders can take forever. But I've learned over the years in dealing with different elderships, the reason is because they are very careful.
Right.
They want to make sure it's the right decision. And you have to learn to appreciate that type of approach to being a leader, as not being careless. As I've always heard, haste makes waste. And sometimes in leadership, if we're not careful, we can cause more damage than we do good because we're not careful. Very good thought. Very good. All right, Rajiv.
We can have passion, we can have love, we can, be committed, we can be everything that's been mentioned. But without integrity, there's no foundation.
Very good. Explain the
You
depth
have
of
a
that,
great
right?
big mansion, you build nice house, and the foundation is weak, or you use, substandard materials.
Yes.
It won't last.
Very
And
good.
sooner or later, and we've seen it time and time again. We don't have to look far, but even in our own country, we've seen people who've taken shortcuts in life. Yeah, they are passionate. Yeah, they are loving. Yeah, they come across as very charismatic, and all the qualities we love about them draws us to them. But then sooner or later, what they made on the inside is reflective, and they fall hard.
Excellent. Excellent thoughts. I agree. I think integrity, character is the word that I use.
The Latin word integer,
Uh-huh.
being whole, one.
Yes. And we're going to talk about that an entire section. In fact, that is the first essential that we go through in talking about the character of a leader and his integrity. So very, very good. Great thoughts. Mark Anthony.
Sacrifice.
Okay. Go ahead and explain.
Leaders, sacrifice their time, talent, and their means a lot of times to get a job done. When they come together, I see a lot of times where they sacrifice things that normally other people wouldn't.
And what we're going to talk about and look at in this class is the higher you go in leadership, the more you sacrifice. You lose a lot of your own freedom, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word, but the higher you go as a leader, the greater the responsibility and the more sacrifice you have to make. It's very true. And there are so many areas that fall into that category of sacrifice that are essential to know getting into this particular work. So, great thoughts. I love this. We're going to have a great class. Rob Sinclair.
I'm going to say collected.
Collected.
And I want to give it a movie illustration.
Okay.
Since I see like movies.
Sometimes.
From We Were Soldiers, I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's got Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore. It's based on a true story. The 7th Cavalry lands in the Ia Drang Valley. And it's the first major battle between the Vietnamese and the Americans. And basically, it's pretty calm at first, and then everything just starts going crazy. A platoon gets cut off and everything, and the guys that are calling in the airstrikes and everything, getting everything coordinated, they get so jittery and they start giving wrong coordinates and stuff, and things start going wrong. And there's bullets flying over their head, and the colonel, the highest ranking guy in the field, stands up, and there's bullets whizzing by him, and he walks over to him and says, "Calm down, just think about what you're doing, do the job. We're here, understand the situation, get it done." And right when he says that, a bullet shoots his flashlight off his vest, and it's a really cool scene. And,
wow.
As soon as he walks away and he shoots the guys that shot at him, the guy starts calling in the right airstrike, everything. Everybody's just watching him, and just how he's not freaking out. And I think if you relay that to the church, there's going to be a lot of problems in the church as well.
And it's not a problem to lead when everything's going well. I mean, there's no problems. So leading is a piece of cake. It's when there are problems. and especially when they start coming in groups of problems, that being collected, that's a great thought. I like that illustration. I think I haven't seen that movie, but from the sounds of it, I think I'd like to. Because I think we can learn a lot about leadership from those types of situations, and learning to be collected when everything seems as though it's falling apart and death is imminent. To be able to say, calm down, I've been here, we know how to do this, and take the lead. That's a great thought, being collected. Oh, I love this stuff. You got a military background too. So, he took your word, didn't he?
No, I was going to say listener.
Ah.
As a father and a husband, this is one of the things I've had to work on the most.
Ah, very good.
With actually listening to my wife, especially my wife and my kids' problems. Because so many times you think, well, I know what's going on here, just listen to what I have to say, but many times I don't. And my wife points that out many times. So.
That's a great thought. And when we talk about communication in leadership, which is a vital part of being a leader, is you've got to be able to communicate. But one of the key roles of that communication process is learning to listen. And we talked about that in Genesis 23. We were talking about Abraham trying to buy that piece of property from Ephron the Hittite. And he's saying, oh, just tell me the price. And he says, oh, I'll just give it to you. What's a piece of property worth 400 shekels between you and me? Well, he was saying, listen to me. And Abraham, in the next verse, it says, listened to him. So that's a great key part of being a leader. And so a good listener, and we're not males, we're not good listeners. We think we've already got it figured out. We already know the solution. Just tell me, all right, good enough. Here's what we need to do. A, B, C, X, Y, Z, do it. And then it's like, okay, you didn't listen to me at all. And so I'll share with you some personal experiences regarding that as a husband when we get into that section, because I'm not a very good listener, and I've learned that over the years myself. So, Albert, what's your word?
Spiritual.
Ooh, I'm surprised it took us this long to get to it. Lay it on me, brother.
A couple of different points of this.
We only have 5 minutes.
First, if you're spiritual, you're going to do the right things, and you're going to have everybody's emotion in view of what's going on. Secondly, any situation you come across, if you're spiritual, you're going to pray about it, you're going to go to the Bible, you're going to find out the way God would want it done, and the second time that the same problem arises, you'll handle it in the same manner. You won't be confusing to nobody. They'll know how you're going to handle it when you bring it to them. It's going to be spiritual. It's going to be the way God wants it done.
Very good. I like those thoughts, brother. That's good stuff. Spiritual. And that's what this class is about, spiritual leadership. You also hinted on something there at the end that I think is very much significant in regards to that, and that's the consistency with which our leadership is seen. Because if we continue to keep going back to the source, was that your word? Sorry.
Was one of them, yes.
Oh. If we keep going back to the source, then we're going to be consistent in how we live as a leader and the decisions that we make as a leader. Spiritual. I like that. Good job. All right, Rob, give me another one.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's all right. It's a combination of two words, but I think they fit. Gentle confidence. I know that I've been in leadership with different things, and I've tried to lead the wrong way, especially as a young man. I know that Boris Yeltsin actually said, you can build a throne of bayonets, but you can't sit on it for long. And I thought that was hilarious when I read that. When you try to lead like this all the time, first of all, you won't be consistent because there will be times where you can't do that. But being gentle, but also being confident at the same time, where you don't let people walk on you. It's hard enough to go back to consistent, because that's what I was going to say. With the gentle confidence as well, another quote that I just found from Dwight Eisenhower said, leadership is the art of getting someone else to do something you want done because he wants to do it. And going back off of what Dale said,
which one?
Dale Babinski, with leading people in the right direction and letting them know that they are going in the right direction is a trick that takes forever to do. And it depends on the situation and which direction you're going for too. But you need to be gentle and confident to do it.
Very good. You're not saved by the bell, brother.
Mine's
Go ahead.
in all those things to conquer all your goals and all your dreams and hopes. And as you look at the beginning of time when God created the earth and all of us, do you think He didn't believe it was going to be something great? So it was always His plan. So if He believed, then we should follow that example of, if he believed in us, we should believe also in Him to be successful in whatever we do.
Very good. Great thought, because really, if you don't believe it, how can you lead others to believe it? And that's from goal setting to vision. I mean, how are you going to cast that vision that you believe in and get others to believe in it if you really don't? Great thoughts. And the gentle confidence was kind of a sneaky way to put two words in there. I'd love to be able to deal with both of those. But I think that from this exercise, what you guys are seeing is there are a lot of ways to describe the idea of a leader. Now, when we come back to this class, particularly on Wednesday, we're going to answer a few more questions in regards to leadership. But then, at the last part of the class, we're going to take a little historical tour from 1920 to the present to look at the different ways that leadership has been defined depending upon the decade and the events that were taking place in our culture and who the primary leader of our country was at that time. It's a very interesting little tour that we'll take as we go through looking at some history in regards to leadership. But thank you so much for your contribution to the class and the direction of this. And we'll meet for homiletics right after lunch. In here. We're in here. Yes.
Are you eating?
Yes.
You're like, I'm not moving it, even if we weren't in here.
Hey guys, I was wondering.